All right, ready to dive into something that's got people talking, like really talking, for over 100 years. We're talking about the Federal Reserve. We're going deep on this one, cracking open The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. And let me tell you, this ain't your Econ 101 textbook. This is a wild ride. Secret meetings, whispers of conspiracies, power moves that would make even Wall Street blush. The whole 9 yards.
Griffin, he's quite the storyteller, gotta give him that.
Oh, yeah.
Paints a picture of the Fed that's, well, it's something else.
Subtle as a bowl in a china shop, maybe?
Something like that. But here's the thing. Even if you don't buy everything he's selling, you gotta understand where he's coming from.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's like, think of those crazy funhouse mirrors. Distorts things, sure, but makes you see things in a whole new light, yeah.
Love that analogy. So we're holding up that funhouse mirror to the Fed, trying to make sense of it all. But to get Griffin's whole deal with the Fed, we got to rewind a bit, right? Like before the Fed, when things were a little chaotic.
Think late 1800s, early 1900s. Bank panics weren't just news. They were full-on economic earthquakes.
People freaking out, I imagine.
Imagine a bank run, but like the whole country. That's the level of chaos we're talking.
So losing their savings, businesses going belly up. Man, that's rough. It makes you appreciate what we got now, even with all the market craziness.
For sure. But that fear, that uncertainty, it's key to understanding why the Fed even exists. Desperate times, right? And as Griffin would argue, sometimes desperate times call for some, let's say, eyebrow-raising solutions.
Here we go. This is where it gets juicy.
Oh, yeah.
Cue the spooky music, because we're about to land on Jekyll Island, 1910. Picture this. Secluded island, super hush-hush gathering. What screams conspiracy theory more than that, right?
The players involved didn't exactly scream transparency either. We're talking JP Morgan's inner circle, banking bigwigs, the whole shebang.
The kind of people who could literally move markets with a whisper.
Precisely. This wasn't some casual brainstorming session.
This is high-stakes, backroom deals, the fate of the nation's money hanging in the balance kind of stuff, right?
You're getting it.
So we got this clandestine meeting, whispers of unchecked power. Feels like a financial thriller up in here. What happens next?
Well, if you're asking what went down, what really went down, Griffin would say it's where the whole blueprint for the Federal Reserve System got scribbled out.
Hold on, back up. A bunch of finance guys, no offense to finance guys.
None taken.
They cook up this plan, in secret no less, to basically be in charge of, well, everyone's money. And nobody bats an eye.
You see, that's exactly Griffin's point. This whole thing, this whole meeting, it reeks of elitism, secrecy, you know. He's saying it set the stage for a system that would always favor the few, not the many.
Okay, but between a bunch of guys huddling on an island and the Fed actually, existing, there's got to be more to the story.
Oh, there's always more to the story. Remember Senator Nelson Aldrich, one of our Jekyll Island mystery men? So he takes those late-night chats, whatever went down, polishes them up real nice, presents it to Congress. That's the Aldrich plan. Catchy, right?
And Congress just rolls out the red carpet. Anything for the Jekyll Island crew.
Not so fast. People weren't thrilled. Don't forget, back then, big banks, they weren't exactly winning popularity contests.
I can imagine.
So handing over the keys to the nation's money supply, even if it's dressed up as this official government thing, it rubs some folks the wrong way.
Made sense. So what changed? How'd the Fed go from controversial idea cooked up on a private island to, the Federal Reserve?
Remember 1907, the panic?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't pretty.
Not pretty at all. That wasn't just a dip in the market. That was a full-on meltdown. People were freaking out, and suddenly everyone's looking for a savior, anything to stop it from happening again.
The classic, never let a crisis go to waste.
Bingo. And who better to swoop in with the solution than the guys who, let's just say, understand how the system works inside and out.
Convenient.
The Aldrich plan with a little makeover, a new name. Suddenly, the Federal Reserve Act doesn't sound so bad, eh?
So fear, good old-fashioned fear, that's what got the Fed up and running.
You could say that. By 1913, everyone's still spooked from '07. December rolls around. President Woodrow Wilson signs the act into law. Boom, the Federal Reserve System is born.
And Griffin's probably thinking, and they let loose the creature.
Something like that. He'd tell you right then, right there, despite all the talk, all the promises, the Fed was going to serve the same folks who met back on Jekyll.
Okay, I get the picture, but what does that look like in the real world? How's the Fed pulling strings, according to Griffin?
He always comes back to their control, right? They've got their hands on the money supply, they can print more, change interest rates, the whole deal, all these tools, and they can be used in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be a problem if it's not used carefully.
Exactly. That's his point. Who benefits? Who loses? These aren't just academic questions. This stuff affects everybody.
Okay, so we've got the origin story, the birth of the Fed, shrouded in secrecy. Now it's time to see how it plays out. What better backdrop than, oh, I don't know, the Great Depression?
You want to talk about a wild ride.
Oh, buckle up. It's about to get real. The Great Depression. Talk about a turning point in history. So where does G. Edward Griffin and his creature from Jekyll Island fit into all of this?
This is where Griffin really goes all in, saying the Fed's actions during the Depression prove they're not on the side of everyday people.
Really, most folks would try to loosen the reins during a downturn, right?
Exactly. But Griffin argues the Fed did the opposite, like slamming on the brakes when the economy was already heading downhill.
Wait, that doesn't make sense. Why would they tighten the money supply when things are already so bad?
He says they hiked up interest rates, restricted the flow of money, basically the opposite of what you'd do in a recession.
So what, they just messed up that badly?
Griffin would say it wasn't a mistake, more like a calculated move.
A calculated move to do what, exactly? If they weren't trying to help the average person, what was the goal here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
He'd argue it was about consolidating power, even if it meant people suffered.
So, while Main Street's struggling, the Fed's looking out for Wall Street and their buddies.
That's how Griffin sees it. Of course, not everyone agrees with that take.
Yeah, blaming everything on one thing is usually a little too simplistic.
Right, lots of economists would say the Fed's actions were far from perfect. But to say they single-handedly caused the Great Depression, that's a stretch.
Okay, so maybe not the sole cause, but still, the point about how their decisions can affect people, that's huge. So where does Griffin's theory go from there?
Fast forward a few decades to 1971, Nixon takes the U.S. off the gold standard.
And that's a whole other can of worms.
To put it mildly, Griffin saw this as a turning point, a huge shift in how the whole financial system worked.
Before we get too far, can we rewind a bit? For those of us who weren't around back then, what did it even mean, being on the gold standard?
Think of it like this. Every dollar in your pocket, it's basically a coupon you can trade in for a tiny piece of gold.
So the dollar was actually backed by something real, something tangible.
Exactly. Which meant the government couldn't just print money willy-nilly. They had to have enough gold in the vault to back it up.
Okay, so I'm picturing Nixon taking us off the gold standard and basically hitting print on the economy.
Not a bad way to put it. This is when the dollar becomes what they call fiat currency. It's like, remember in The Wizard of Oz when they pull back the curtain? Fiat currency is kind of like, it's all about belief.
Interesting. So it's like we're all just agreeing to believe in the system even though there's no wizard behind the curtain? How does Griffin tie this back to the Fed?
He saw it as giving them way too much power, no gold backing the dollar. The Fed's free to print as much as they want, which Griffin argues leads to inflation and a whole bunch of other problems.
It's amazing how much hinges on that idea of trust then and now, right? Makes you think about all the debates around cryptocurrency. It all comes back to this.
Exactly. And that's what Griffin wanted us to think about, the power dynamics. Who benefits from the way things are set up? He kept calling the Fed out on this right up until he passed away, especially after that whole 2008 crisis. Remember those bank bailouts?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
Griffin saw that as the Fed showing their true colors, flexing their muscles to protect the big guys, the ones who are already at the top.
It's a pretty consistent picture he paints. The Fed as this powerful force, maybe not always for the benefit of the everyday person. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, you got to admit, it makes you think twice about who's really in control.
Absolutely. The creature from Jekyll Island, it's a story that sparked a lot of debate, and rightfully so. It's a reminder to keep asking tough questions about the Fed, the institutions that control our money. Because at the end of the day, these decisions, they affect all of us.
Couldn't have put it better myself. And that wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating, mysterious, and sometimes downright perplexing world of the Federal Reserve. Keep those questions coming because the story of money, it's far from over.